August 17, 1943, the ancient port of Messina. General George Patton stood in the city square, dust still settling on his polished boots, watching the road from the south. His aide checked his watch nervously. Montgomery's forces were approaching. The British field marshal had no idea what was waiting for him. Patton lit a cigar and smiled that dangerous smile his staff had learned to fear. He'd done it. He'd beaten Montgomery to Sicily's prize, and the careful, methodical British commander was about to arrive second in a race he didn't even know he was running. It was a horse race, Monty Patton would say hours later, his voice dripping with satisfaction. We won. And in that moment, when Montgomery's face turned to barely controlled fury beneath his professional courtesy, the entire Allied command structure shifted forever. This wasn't supposed to happen. Britain was the senior partner. Montgomery was the proven victor of El Alamein. Americans were the eager students, learning warfare from experienced teachers who'd been fighting since 1939. Sicily was supposed to be Montgomery's triumph, the campaign that would cement British military supremacy in the Mediterranean. Instead, it became the humiliation he never forgot, and the rivalry that would poison Allied cooperation for the rest of the war. May 1943, planning rooms in North Africa. Montgomery sat at the head of the table, maps of Sicily spread before him. His reputation had never been higher. El Alamein had made him Britain's military hero, the general who'd finally beaten Rommel when everyone else had failed. Now he would lead the invasion of Sicily, the stepping stone to mainland Europe. Naturally, the British Eighth Army would take the primary objective. The plan reflected the hierarchy. Everyone understood. Montgomery's forces would land on Sicily's eastern coast and drive north toward Messina. The Americans under Patton would land in the west and south, protecting the British flank, while Montgomery did the real work. It was logical. It was practical. It completely ignored one crucial factor: George Patton's ego. Montgomery made his views clear in planning meetings. According to witnesses, he told Eisenhower directly, "The Americans are keen and willing, but they lack experience in this type of warfare." His voice carried that patrician certainty that came from 5 years of combat. "It's better that we, British, who have been fighting since 1939, take the lead role. The Americans can support us admirably by protecting our flanks." The diplomatic language couldn't hide the condescension. The adults would handle the important work. The Americans would watch and learn. Patton sat through these sessions seething, his jaw clenched so tight his staff worried he'd crack his teeth. He knew exactly what Montgomery was doing, relegating American forces to a supporting role, ensuring the British press would present Sicily's capture as Montgomery's achievement, making Americans look like junior partners who needed guidance. Patton returned from one planning meeting and told his chief of staff something that wasn't in any official document. "We're going to beat Monty to Messina," he said, his voice cold with determination. "I don't care what the plans say. American forces are going to be first into that city." His staff stared at him. The routes favored Montgomery. The distances favored Montgomery. The entire operational plan was designed to put Montgomery and Messina first. How could Patton possibly win a race that wasn't officially happening? But Patton had already begun studying the maps, calculating distances, identifying routes that would let American forces reach Messina if they moved fast enough and ignored their assigned support role. It was operationally questionable. It was potentially insubordinate. It was vintage Patton. July 10, 1943. The invasion began. Both armies landed successfully in the largest amphibious assault yet attempted. Montgomery's Eighth Army immediately drove north toward Messina along the eastern coast. The route was shorter, the objective was clear. Everything favored the British. Then Montgomery encountered the problem that would plague him throughout the campaign. German forces had prepared brilliant defensive positions along the eastern approach. Every ridge became a fortress. Every town required careful reduction. Montgomery's methodical style, artillery preparation followed by infantry assault, was thorough but desperately slow. Towns fell, progress continued, but at a grinding, careful pace that made Patton smile when he read the intelligence reports. Meanwhile, Patton launched an aggressive drive westward toward Palermo. This wasn't in the plan. Montgomery expected Patton to protect his flank. Eisenhower expected Patton to support British operations. Instead, Patton raced across western Sicily so fast that by the time higher command realized what he was doing, American forces were already approaching Sicily's capital. July 22nd, 12 days after landing. Patton captured Palermo. Montgomery was furious. Patton had abandoned his flank protection role to grab headlines. Palermo had no strategic significance for completing the island's conquest. Montgomery complained to Eisenhower that Patton was grandstanding while British troops did the serious work of defeating German forces. But Patton's Palermo operation had a hidden purpose Montgomery completely missed. The American general had positioned his forces on Sicily's northern coast, directly west of Messina. Now he had a route, the coastal road along the island's northern shore that led straight to the ultimate objective. It was longer than Montgomery's route, but it was far less defended. And most importantly, Patton could advance along it without anyone officially telling him not to, because his orders were vague enough to allow aggressive interpretation. Montgomery, focused on his careful advance up the eastern coast, dismissed American activity on the northern road. "The Americans are conducting supporting operations," he told his staff. "They'll protect our flank while we complete the advance to Messina." He had no idea Patton was racing him to the prize. By early August, Montgomery's intelligence officers began reporting increased American activity. Aggressive patrolling, amphibious end runs around German positions, a pace that suggested something more than flank protection. When they informed Montgomery, he waved them off. The Americans were enthusiastic but undisciplined. They'd wear themselves out while British forces methodically closed on Messina. August 15th, Montgomery's headquarters received disturbing reports. American forces were advancing rapidly toward Messina itself, not supporting operations, not flank protection. A direct push for the objective. Staff officers estimated Americans might reach Messina within 2 or 3 days. Meanwhile, Montgomery's forces, despite weeks of brutal fighting, were still miles from the city. Montgomery's reaction, recorded by officers present, mixed disbelief with anger. "The Americans are supposed to be supporting our advance," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "This is not what was planned." He immediately sent messages to Eisenhower questioning Patton's movements, but it was too late. Patton's forces were closer to Messina and moving faster. Montgomery faced an impossible choice: speed up his advance and accept higher casualties by taking more risks, or maintain his methodical approach and accept that Americans might reach Messina first. His professionalism said maintain the plan. His pride said speed up. He ordered his commanders to accelerate. British and Canadian forces that had been fighting methodically for over a month suddenly received urgent orders. Push harder, move faster, reach Messina before the Americans. Maximum effort required. Montgomery's message read, "This is a matter of British military honor." The phrase revealed everything. This was no longer about tactics or strategy. It had become about pride and reputation, in which Allied nation would claim Sicily's glory. But geography and German defenses couldn't be changed by orders. Montgomery's forces fought through Sicily's most difficult terrain against prepared positions. Patton's forces, having taken the longer but less defended route, faced fewer obstacles. August 16th, intelligence confirmed American forces were within striking distance. Montgomery personally moved forward to observe his advance. He visited frontline units. He urged commanders to push harder. He made it clear that reaching Messina before the Americans was now the priority. But even as he drove his forces forward, reports kept arriving. American units entering Messina's outskirts. The race was over. Montgomery had lost. August 17, 1943. Morning, elements of Patton's 3rd Division entered Messina. There was no grand battle. German forces had already evacuated across the strait to mainland Italy. But that wasn't the point. The point was that American forces had gotten there first, and Patton made absolutely certain everyone knew it. He entered Messina with photographers in tow. American flags were raised, soldiers celebrated. Patton stood in the city center, grinning like a man who'd just won the greatest prize of his life. Montgomery arrived several hours later. The exact timing varies in different accounts. Some say 3 hours, others say longer. What's not disputed is that when Montgomery's staff car rolled into Messina, they found Patton already there, waiting to greet the British field marshal with exaggerated courtesy. According to multiple witnesses, Patton's exact words were delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It was a horse race, Monty. We won." Montgomery's face, described by observers, showed barely controlled fury beneath his professional courtesy. He congratulated Patton formally, made brief remarks about the successful completion of the Sicily campaign, then retreated to his headquarters as quickly as protocol allowed. Once there, Away from American witnesses, Montgomery's real feelings erupted. His chief of staff, General Francis de Gingand, recorded the moment. "The field marshal was angrier than I'd ever seen him," de Gingand wrote. He felt the Americans had turned a serious military campaign into a publicity stunt. Montgomery paced his command tent, his voice rising with each sentence. Patton ignored his assigned role. He conducted an operation designed purely for headlines. He treated the capture of Messina like it was a sporting event rather than military necessity. Montgomery's official report to General Alexander was carefully worded but couldn't hide his displeasure. 7th Army advanced rapidly along the northern coast route to Messina, arriving before 8th Army completed its advance. While this represents initiative and aggressive spirit, it resulted in both armies advancing on the same objective rather than maintaining coordinated operations. But his private communications were far less diplomatic. In a letter to Field Marshal Allen Brooke, Montgomery wrote with bitter precision, "Patton conducted himself like a cowboy, seeking personal glory rather than a professional officer executing a coordinated plan. His race to Messina served no military purpose. German forces had already evacuated. It was pure theatrics designed to make Americans look good at British expense." Most damningly, Montgomery complained that Patton had abandoned his mission protecting 8th Army's flank. While technically true, this ignored that Montgomery's slow advance meant there wasn't much flank to protect. The British press, which had expected to trumpet Montgomery's capture of Messina as the crowning achievement of the Sicily campaign, had to report instead that Americans had gotten there first. They tried diplomatic framing. Both armies had succeeded together, but the truth was obvious. In the race to Messina, the Americans had won. Montgomery's methodical professionalism had been beaten by Patton's audacious opportunism. The incident permanently poisoned the Montgomery-Patton relationship. In the weeks following Sicily's capture, Montgomery's assessment of American capability remained condescending, now tinged with personal animosity. At a commanders' conference in September, he commented acidly, "American forces demonstrated aggressive spirit in Sicily. However, aggressive spirit without proper planning and coordination can create problems." The subtext was clear. Montgomery believed Patton's race had been reckless and counterproductive, motivated by ego rather than military necessity. Patton, hearing these comments, responded with characteristic bluntness. "Montgomery is upset because Americans proved we can move faster and fight harder than British forces. He expected us to be junior partners, learning from British experience. Instead, we beat him at his own game." The rivalry extended poisonously into all future operational planning. When discussions began for the eventual invasion of France, both men lobbied intensely for command roles. Montgomery wanted overall ground command of Allied forces. Patton wanted complete freedom to conduct aggressive armored operations without British interference or oversight. Eisenhower found himself constantly mediating between two prima donnas who could barely tolerate being in the same room. Montgomery's post-war writings, particularly his memoirs, published years later, revealed the depth of his lingering bitterness about Sicily and Messina. In his autobiography, he attempted to reframe history with careful language. The Sicily campaign was successfully completed, with both Allied armies reaching Messina and securing the island. That the Americans reached Messina first was simply a matter of routes and timing rather than genuine military significance. The real achievement was defeating German forces and securing Sicily, which British forces accomplished while fighting against the strongest enemy resistance along the most direct route. This was Montgomery's deliberate attempt to argue that British forces did the genuinely hard fighting against Germany's best defenses, while Americans took the easier, longer route to grab undeserved glory and headlines. It was technically accurate that Montgomery had faced stronger German resistance along the eastern approach, but it deliberately ignored that Patton's aggressive maneuvering and rapid advances had confused German defensive planning and drawn attention away from Montgomery's advance in ways that actually helped British operations. Patton characteristically had absolutely no interest in diplomatic revisionism or careful historical reframing. He told reporters, historians, and literally anyone who would listen, "I beat Montgomery to Messina fair and square, and he's never gotten over it. The British thought Americans were amateurs who needed their guidance. We proved we could outfight, outmaneuver, and outrun the British Army when it mattered. The personal rivalry between Montgomery and Patton became legendary, the subject of countless books and arguments. But it obscured a far more important historical truth. Sicily proved definitively that American forces had fully come of age as a military power. They could plan complex operations, execute aggressive maneuvers, adapt to battlefield conditions, and achieve decisive objectives as effectively as any European army with centuries of military tradition. Montgomery never fully accepted this reality. Until his death in 1976, he maintained consistently that British military professionalism and experience were fundamentally superior to American improvisation and aggressive opportunism. That careful planning and thorough preparation always trumped reckless speed and theatrical operations. That his methodical approach to Sicily had been tactically and operationally correct. Even if Patton somehow managed to reach Messina first through luck and aggression rather than professional skill, but history's judgment has been considerably less kind to Montgomery's defensive position. The general who arrived second has a much weaker claim to vindication, regardless of how carefully and eloquently he explains why he was slower. The final word perhaps belongs to General Dwight Eisenhower, who had the unenviable task of managing both men's massive egos throughout the war. In his post-war memoir, he wrote with hard-earned diplomatic precision, "Montgomery and Patton represented fundamentally different philosophies of warfare. Montgomery's careful, methodical approach minimized casualties and ensured success through overwhelming preparation and systematic execution. Patton's aggressive, opportunistic approach achieved objectives faster, but with considerably higher risk and less predictability. Both methods had genuine military value in different circumstances. The personal tension between them was deeply unfortunate, but perhaps inevitable when two such strong personalities competed for limited glory and recognition." Sicily showed the world that American forces could operate at the highest level of military competence. That Patton beat Montgomery to Messina made that point far more dramatically and memorably than any amount of diplomatic language or official reports could ever have achieved. Montgomery learned in Sicily that Americans wouldn't accept second place anymore, that the days of British military supremacy over their transatlantic allies were definitively over. Patton made absolutely certain of that with his race to Messina, and Montgomery, despite decades of attempts to reframe the narrative, never quite forgave him for that humiliation. The race to Messina was more than just a competition between two ambitious generals with massive egos. It was the precise moment when American forces proved they belonged on completely equal footing with their British allies. Montgomery's bitter, angry reaction revealed how profoundly difficult it was for Britain to accept that its junior partner had become its equal, perhaps even its superior. If this deep dive into one of World War II's most intense personal rivalries fascinated you, then you need to subscribe to this channel immediately. We bring you the untold stories from history's greatest conflicts, the personal battles behind the official victories, the moments of rivalry and triumph that changed warfare forever. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next video exploring the hidden drama of military history. Drop a comment about whether you think Montgomery or Patton was right about Sicily and the race to Messina. Share this video with anyone who loves the complicated, messy truth behind military glory and official histories. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest victories are the ones that prove you're nobody's second choice and refuse to accept anyone else's definition of your capabilities.